Firefighters in Muskegon are sounding the alarm, not over the fires, but over staffing to tackle them. And joining me now from the Muskegon Professional Firefighters Union, IAFF Local 370, President Michael Hewertson. Thank you so much for being here with us to talk about this issue.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk specifically what you're seeing in Muskegon. What are the staffing levels like? Where's the issue at where you are serving right now?
Well, specifically in Muskegon, our staffing levels can drop as low as 2 firefighters per fire engine. The national standard is 4 as a minimum number. And so obviously we're at half of what that national standard is. But this is a problem well beyond Muskegon. It's across Muskegon County as well as Michigan as a whole.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked to you back in the summer about that staffing shortage on the engine. Specifically, you said 2 firefighters per engine. So it sounds like when we talked to you back in the summer versus now, things have not changed.
Yeah, we've been able to add 1 person per shift for our fire department, but still that gap between where we're at and where we need to be for firefighter and citizen safety is still a very large gap. And again, across the state, not everyone is as lucky. Some are facing cuts and others are just maintaining that status quo with no plan to move forward with any increased staffing.
Yeah, of course, I think that brings the question of safety for the community too. When you look at the maybe amount of cuts that are happening across the state, but also the amount of staffing that many fire departments have or don't have, what does that translate to into a community safety standpoint?
It's huge. Not only for us, obviously, we're concerned about our safety when we're going in with less than ideal numbers of personnel. But what it means when the fire department shows up at somebody's worst day of their life is we're having to choose between essential tasks. And instead of being able to simultaneously do task A, B, and C that need to be done immediately, we have to pick which one we're going to prioritize, and those other tasks are delayed. And that just results in a poorer outcome, whether that's property loss or potentially injury or death.
Yeah, and the last couple of Facebook posts that you guys have posted on your union Facebook page, and I'm going to read off my laptop here. You said you've had 2 fires in as many weeks where there was only a single 2-man crew available, one on December 7th where there was an off-duty Grand Rapids firefighter and crews from Norton Shores called in to help, the other on the 12th where early reports said that there was a person inside. Thankfully, that ended up not being the case. But first, talk about the teamwork on the 7th, where not only you have that off-duty firefighter from Grand Rapids there, but also mutual aid from Norton Shores. Can you talk about the teamwork that it takes to even respond to these fires in these moments where you are short-staffed?
Absolutely. Well, we're advocating for 4 firefighters per engine and per truck. That's the minimum standard again. But even just getting to 3 allows that first arriving company to get to work when they get on scene. If they show up with 2, they're simply unable to go inside that building just from legal purposes. So in this case of the fire on December 7th, we had, again, an off-duty Grand Rapids firefighter who lives in the neighborhood happened to be able to help us. We had another neighbor who was familiar with our water system who was able to help us. They were able to take on the tasks of the personnel that were missing from that first due engine. And that allowed that outcome to end up being essentially quite positive. And then for the second fire, again, a positive outcome in the end. It turned out that there was not an occupant trap. They had just gone back in and snuck back out the door without us knowing. So nobody was trapped and the fire was quickly contained. But again, seconds matter, minutes matter, and that could have been much different if that was, say, in the middle of the night versus at 5 p.m. when everyone's awake.
Yeah, the other thing, too, I want to bring up is if you do have possible victims inside of let's say, a home that's on fire, with a 2-man crew, are you guys even allowed to go in to search, or how does that work? What are the regulations behind that, and what would you or would not have been able to do if you were short-staffed on that engine?
From a standpoint of legality, if there is a known rescue, we're allowed to go in. It doesn't matter what our staffing level is at. But that's a known confirmed occupant inside. For our fires, many times we're given reports that the victims are out, but we don't know that for sure. And so in those cases, per the law, we're technically required to wait outside. But if there's any report or indication that somebody may be inside, then our members are faced with that decision of, do I go in alone, or do I go in understaffed, or do I wait here and potentially have a negative outcome? And obviously, firefighters, we show up, we want to get the job done, we want to do the best for the public, so they're putting themselves at even additional risk above and beyond what we normally face to go into these situations with either them just alone or with only minimum staff.
Yeah, we also know seconds matter in those circumstances too. So having to make that split-second decision, regardless of scenario, has got to be nerve-wracking there. So I want to talk about the lack of staffing at fire stations, not only in Muskegon County, but also in all of the state of Michigan. Why should people at home listening to this care about those staffing levels? I mean, obviously there's an obvious answer, but I want to hear it from you. Why should people at home listening to this care about staffing levels in their local fire departments?
I think there's a level of calm people have when they see that there's a fire station in their neighborhood or they see the fire truck driving down the road, and the average citizen doesn't notice or think even that maybe there's a chance that there's not enough firefighters on that engine to actually do the work they're expecting. And that's kind of the problem we're facing right now across the state is there's no mechanism for firefighters to be able to push the conversation to improve staffing. So if a particular municipality, township, or city decides that they don't want to have additional staffing, there's no way to force that issue. And what we're looking to is have legislation come into play that would require there to at least be a conversation where the two parties have to sit down and negotiate that staffing just as they would pay and other benefits. Because honestly, as far as firefighters are concerned, staffing is more important than our pay and our benefits. We can't do our job effectively, and we're not as likely to come home safe if our staffing levels are poor.
So I'm assuming you're talking about House Bill 5290, which is in Lansing right now being talked about. There was another version of this bill working its way through last year. What was the process that happened last year, and why did it get kind of rolled over to this year?
So last year it just was never brought to the floor to be signed for the vote and to be signed. Unfortunately, the legislative term ended before action could be taken, and therefore we had to start all over again this year. The Senate has passed an equivalent bill, and now there is House Bill 5290 sitting available in the House right now. It just hasn't been brought to a vote, and that's where we're hoping we can get our citizens to reach out to their representatives and say, you know what, this is important to us. This is a nonpartisan issue. We need to bring it to a floor. We need to get a vote, and we need to help out firefighters and make sure that not only the firefighters are safe, but ultimately this is a community safety issue.
Yeah, of course, it's just in one chamber or passed in one chamber from what you're saying. And that means that there's a long road ahead for this bill as it makes its way through the State House. You know, until we can get legislation passed and on the books in Michigan, is there a quick fix, or is this just kind of our first step?
Right now at the local level, the quickest fix, I guess I would say, would be that citizens in communities can educate themselves on what their firefighter staffing level is at, and then speak to their firefighters and try to determine if they're receiving the level of service they believe they deserve for their tax base. That's the first conversation, and then holding local leaders accountable. In some communities, there's an opportunity to hire more firefighters, and it just doesn't happen. Some communities, that's simply not possible. But again, if the citizens can reach out, advocate for additional staffing, and encourage the city leaders to do as best they can for staffing given their budget circumstances.
Over time, when a firehouse or a fire department is not as staffed up as it should be, how does that wear on the other firefighters that do go into work every day and put their all into their job? How does that wear on them when they're having to take up multiple tasks that they otherwise wouldn't be required to do so if there were more folks on board?
Absolutely. It's one of those long-term issues that firefighters aren't going to talk about readily. We like to think we're big, tough people who are able to handle whatever's handed to them. But the reality is when you're expected to do a job that's as difficult physically as what we deal with and mentally, there's a need for rehab on a fire scene, and there's a need for that repetitive nature of the overexertion to not occur. And right now, with the low staffing, firefighters are being put in a situation where the national standard would say you need to go to rehab, you need to have your vitals checked, you need to sit for 30 minutes, you need to have medical care until you can go back in. Whereas, unfortunately, when staffing just isn't available on a scene, those same 4 or 6 firefighters are just going in over and over and over again. So instead of doing 20 minutes of extreme exertion, they're doing an hour or an hour and a half worth of exertion, which is going to cause, obviously, health issues, both short-term and long-term.
Yeah. I want to ask, too, when you recruit someone into the fire department, how long does it take to train someone before they're actually on an engine? So obviously my question is there a gap from when you hire somebody to when they're actually on the engine, and how could that play a role in the shortage as well?
So really no gap as far as how long it would take for them to be personnel who could be on a scene assisting us. Specific to Muskegon, we have a hiring list in place almost all the time that has eligible candidates on it. It's not an issue of recruiting. There's not a shortage of people interested in the profession. It's simply a shortage of positions across the state for these firefighters to go work at. But in terms of turnaround time, it is dependent on the individual department. But for most departments, you're already coming in certified, so there's only a very basic week or two of training until you're on the fire engine responding. And then the remainder of that training occurs when you are out there as manpower towards your fire department.
Yeah, I think that wraps up my questions. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you think is important for folks to maybe understand about the process here, or maybe how it works in Muskegon as to why you're not seeing the amount of staffing levels that you would like to see? Is there anything like that that you want people to know at home?
Well, I think just a reminder that there's a number of issues at play here. You can look at revenue sharing and reductions there as to why municipalities have difficulty being able to fund public safety right now, caps on property tax increases, things like that. But ultimately, it does come down to this House Bill 5290 and the ability for firefighters to negotiate, because right now there just doesn't have to be a conversation. And it's not fair to us when we're willing to respond to any alarm and do whatever it takes, that when we sound an alarm about firefighter safety and firefighter staffing levels, that can be ignored. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So we're just hoping that we can get this bill passed. It will only require a conversation. It would never require a community to hire firefighters they can't afford. It just puts both parties at the table to discuss it and hopefully come to a resolution that improves safety for both the firefighters and the community.
If I can ask, what brought us to this point where we're now talking about legislation at the state level? Are there just local officials that refuse to have that conversation, or just don't believe that the problem is that serious enough?
Yes, they're across the board. Municipalities tend to refuse to have the conversation on staffing. It's concerns about what the impacts it might have on the budget down the line. And that's where this legislation is great, because it's not requiring any municipality to hire anybody they can't afford. So that's just the key point to keep hitting on, is to have that conversation, but it doesn't obligate. And right now, that request by a fire department or a fire union to talk about minimum staffing levels can be simply ignored. And we just want to close that loophole, make sure there's a conversation, and then the two parties can come to an agreement. Okay, well, hopefully in a year we will be having a different conversation, perhaps. What would you hope you see out of fire stations across the state in about a year if this gets passed here? I think what we are hoping to find is just that municipalities understand that a minimum staffing level is not productive, but it's also dangerous to citizens, to our health and our well-being, and that striving towards that minimum national standard of 4 in Michigan is a key goal. Are we going to be able to get there overnight? Absolutely not. Are there a bunch of hurdles to jump over? Yes, absolutely. Can every community afford to have 3 or 4 firefighters on an engine? No. But those that can, we want to get there, and those that can't now, we want to get them to have that conversation of forming the plan about how they are going to get there in the near future. All right, the Muskegon Professional Firefighters Union President Michael Hewitson, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it as well.